as a business owner, as a business leader, I feel pretty strongly that you have a responsibility to lead. However that is, and you have a responsibility, or you and your partners, to lead the company and provide a path, and whatever that path is. And I think as time has gone on, I've thought more that if you should provide a path for that company to go on without you, however that is.
Hey, and welcome back to Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. As always, joined by Wes. How's it going, Wes?
Hey, how you doing?
And we do have Brooks with us as well. Brooks, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Spence. How are you doing?
Good, good. I'm a little sleep deprived, but other than that, also fantastic. So, yeah, been working on
the next 30 years.
I know, it was super encouraging, talking to you guys. Had our second boy here a few weeks ago, and both of you just said, oh yeah, pretty much once you have kids, just get used to not sleeping. So
that's right. Yeah,
I'm prepping myself for now a lifetime of never getting that sleep back.
You'll never sleep the same way
again. Yeah, exactly. I think that was more it. You just never sleep the same way again.
Yeah. Like, oh, what was that noise? Oh, somebody on the move. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and I can already feel that lightening up.
Yeah, I got a neighbor who starts his truck at 3:30 every morning, and it's not super loud, but it's got a little bit of a tuned exhaust or something. And it's like, guaranteed. It's like, oh yeah, there's Bob firing up his truck to go to work. And then I wait 10 minutes while he warms it up, and then he leaves. Yeah.
And do you fall back asleep, or?
Well, you should just be
thinking, on the day.
I'm really glad I'm not going to work at 3. So
that's right. Yeah, he works down the port, and he works 12s, and he's got super long days. And yeah, but he's definitely, I'm sure he just hits the remote start, and from his bed. So all his neighbors will listen to the rumble, while he finally.
Yeah, Mosey's out there 10 or 15 minutes later.
Yeah, I can always tell you can just hear him drop it into gear, rolls out of his driveway. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That would have been perfect for my high school self. I was a little bit weird in that, or maybe a lot bit weird, that I would set my alarm for 1:30 or 2 in the morning because I loved the feeling of waking up and knowing I've got 4 more hours of sleep, and so then I go back to sleep.
I'm gonna put that down to a lot.
Every time I hear you tell that story, I think, oh my God.
I know it doesn't make any sense other than I always remember when you naturally wake up on a school day or something and it's 2 a.m. I remember just internally cheering like, oh yes, I've got more sleep. I don't need to get up yet. And then for some reason that turned into, I want this feeling every night. And I'd fall back asleep within like 15 seconds, but you'd get that little moment. So anyway, Mal, edit this out. This is, we don't need this.
You definitely need to include this.
Yeah. So if you want, share your odd quirks with us on the comments of this episode.
Just keep it PG.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Would you? Yeah. Otherwise, we have to just go in and be deleting stuff all the time. Well, we're not going to talk about sleep for this episode, but we kind of wanted to build off of some of these discussions we've been having around transitions and the different dynamics you have when you have multiple generations and moving a business forward. Just seems like it's super complex, and the idea of like estate planning came up. So I think we'll talk a little bit about that, but then kind of work into some of the more challenging pieces. But I guess, Wes, maybe we'll start there with estate planning. I guess let's hit some high level points on what should people be thinking about there that maybe relates to transferring of a business and some of those kind of details.
Boy, I don't know. There is a lot there, but I think a lot of it depends on how your business is structured. Is it, is it an LLC or some other format? But depends on what you want to have happen to that business. I think that's the first question, do you expect this business when you pass to be liquidated? Or if that's not your desire, you know, if you want it to be going down to the next generation, if you have kids working in the business, kind of have to think through from a practical standpoint, how you want it to look, you know, and you don't have to get into the ins and outs of all the legal details. I mean, you'll have to get there eventually, but just think about what you want for your business and for your heirs, or whether you want your heirs to receive anything or not. You know, could be quite the opposite. Maybe you want to leave everything to the local library or something. So sorry, Johnny, but that's just the way we rolled on this one. You didn't know. So think about.
I think it's always good to surprise them too. It's
yeah, right.
Good,
yeah, that's always good.
Like a great surprise.
So yeah. Rule number one: don't talk to your heirs about what you're doing at all. You know, keep it all under wraps.
Build a big business and then just pass it off to the library.
And then just don't tell anyone what's going to happen, and then just check out and not be able to tell anybody what you were thinking. So that's one strategy. Another strategy would be to have conversations with people that are involved and have their life tied up in this as well. So I would start there. And then once you have thought through what you want to have happen from a practical standpoint, this would be the end result. You know, this is my end result after I'm gone. This is what I would want to have happen. Then that's where you call in your attorney and your accountant and start to work through what are the legal structures that you can put together to make that happen. At this point, I'll punt it over to Brooks for legal structures.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hey, thanks, bud. I agree with what Wes is saying, that there is the legal structure of what you have to set up, and so definitely you've got to bring in your estate planning attorney. You should bring your CPA in. You may have your business attorney, who's different than your estate planning attorney. They just talk about putting together a team of people that are going to help you do this plan. I mean, this is not if you have an estate of any size, and this is not something you do, pull just something off the internet and think, oh yeah, okay, I'll just, I'll fill out this form because you wanted to save, 10 grand. So it's not that, but you do want to do your own due diligence and try to figure out what you think you want to have happen, so you don't spend hours and hours and hours with the legal team coming up with these different scenarios. Better to have talked about it with, if you have a partner, business partner or life partner, talk with them about what you're thinking. Talk to your friends or other business people that and say, hey, I'm thinking about trying to figure out these different structures. What have you done? And you're going to get all sorts of answers. You'll get people like, I just hadn't thought about it, to people like, oh, well, I have a very detailed plan. And, most people are willing to share. They may not want to share, the dollars and cents of everything, but just conceptually, what they've been thinking or what they've set up.
So basically what you're saying there, decide the outcome. So this is what I would like it to look like. And then you pull in the legal team to go, okay, how do I accomplish that?
So that's all the legal aspects of it. And what I think Wes and I have been discovering over the last, couple of years is that there's the legal aspect that happens when someone dies. But there's all this other stuff that happens before then. So it's easier to think about these things in terms of, someone's killed in a car wreck. There's kind of this immediate, someone has passed and now the estate plan's activated, or the business transition plan's activated by that significant event. Typically, it's not that way. It's mostly people get older and they either keep running their business as they get older, and they lose capacity, or they don't, but somehow they're participating, and the business keeps running on, and there's not really a transition. So I think that's more the softer side of, how do you transition a business? the mechanics of that, which really are different than an estate plan. An estate plan is like, after I pass, this is what happens.
And I think that's a good point, Brooks, because the estate plan, by its very nature, is not time fixed, in the sense that, you know, you don't know when that event will happen. And so that, because of that, you really need to do some other stuff around transitioning your business, because otherwise, I mean, there's a couple of things could happen. If you could think about it, you know, oh, someone could pass very early, you know, through an accident or something, and then that triggers a whole set of things. Maybe the business isn't ready to transition, or those types of things, and that happens. Or the opposite end of the spectrum is someone never transitions out, and, you know, they actually are still kind of engaged well into their 80s and 90s. And, you know, I've even heard instances of people in their early 100s, you know, never quite transitioning out of the business. And so that, what that does is, for the next generation or whoever is transitioning to the business, it creates a lot of uncertainty for them. And so then that can have unintended consequences, where maybe the folks that you were thinking were going to take over your business are no longer there because they just got tired of waiting
They've
around.
retired. Maybe they've already retired.
Maybe they retire, right? You know, you always kind of, it's kind of a joke, you know, around family businesses, where you've got the dad who's 98, and you've got the son, you know, or daughter well into their 70s or, you know, early 80s, and they're
yeah, and they're just like, hey, I'm waiting for dad to, you know, transition the business. It's like,
right, yeah, and their kids, you know, the grandkids are retiring.
yeah, I mean, very well could be.
Right.
So I think the important thing is, as a business owner, as a business leader, I feel pretty strongly that you have a responsibility to lead, however that is, and you have a responsibility, or you and your partners, to lead the company and provide a path, and whatever that path is. And I think as time has gone on, I've thought more that if you should provide a path for that company to go on without you, however that is, and do that in a leadership manner, instead of just kind of like, well, you know, we'll just see what happens. Or, you know, and even if you want to run the business till you kick it, and you think you're going to run it till you're 100, well, that's fine, you know, but don't and do that, and say that, and do it, and then deal with the consequences of what happens when that occurs, you know, when you do that, because there are consequences. If you want to die, you know, die in the cockpit, you know, with the stick in your hand, you're like, I'm going to run this thing till it's done. You'll probably be doing it by yourself or with hired people, and there won't be any family members around, because they're going to age out. They're just going to age out.
Yeah, it feels like in this scenario where, like, kind of there's the estate piece, but then the other documents of moving the business forward. I mean, it's where the owner is still at least 100% or heavily involved, and then the next generation is maybe involved to some degree, or not at all, but they're hoping, like you said, maybe they're waiting. But it's a weird scenario, it feels like, because you've got so many variables and so many unknowns, or there could be, I guess, if depending on how the leader is operating, or that initial founder. And so you've got to, I guess, how often should you be talking about this? Because it seems like it could either just keep going, like you said, like somebody could live to 100, or, you know, or not. And so there's just a lot of gray area. I don't know, Wes, what do you think?
Well, I think you should be talking about it at least annually, right? So I think the first step would be for you as the leader, as Brooks points out, the leader and the owner, figure out what you want for this business, and write that down. So write it down on paper and say, this is my business plan, you know, my ultimate business plan. And you know, whether it's I want to operate this until I'm 60 or I'm 70, and I want family members to be involved, and this is how I see them being involved, and this is how I would see sharing ownership or not sharing ownership. Whatever you see as the vision for your business, you need to write that down. And if you have family members that are coming into the business, either they're not there yet or they are, but once you develop that, if they're in the business, then you need to sit down with them pretty quickly and have a discussion, go out for coffee, set up a special meeting just for that and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking now. How does that fit with what you're thinking? So if you've got kids in the business, you need to get input from them as to what they were thinking, because they may have a radically different viewpoint. And some of it's just because of your age and perspective, right? So you may not, as a kid, you may not even understand what all the ramifications are, or what the parent is thinking about. So I think that's step one, is have a good business plan, but a business plan around your arc for the business and what the family members, how they would participate, or how you see them participating. But then you have to revisit it, I think, regularly, because everything changes, right? Sure. The business does well, it doesn't do well. People change their mind, they come and they go. So you got to sit down. I would say once a year. Brooks, you may feel differently.
No, I think once a year. More often is too much, because these are bigger lifetime things. But I think the just like you said, Wes, is that you need to be checking in with your players. Which is if you're saying, I'm trying to build a family business, I'm trying to bring my kids into it, which is kind of just, I say we use that example because that's probably 99% of it, where that occurs. And you got to be talking to your kids and at whatever point you are in it, and say, here, here's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? And so like, for example, Todd and I were very clear in our business that this business would not transition to the next generation. And so we're just clear. We were clear around the dinner table when the kids were 10. Hey, this is not going to be something we transition to you guys. Our plan instead is we're going to, convert the construction business into, a rental portfolio, and you guys will participate that way. And that's how we're going to transfer our assets. So that we're just very clear about that. So it was never about the ongoing business. So we had clarity about that very early, and we had those conversations, annually for sure. Because there were some years it's like, well, good news, there's not going to be any business to transfer anyway due to the recession. So not to worry.
Yeah, and I think it becomes even more valuable to have those conversations if you have some kids working in the business and some not working in the business. Absolutely. Which was certainly the case. There's 5 kids in our family, or our siblings. Brooks and I have 3 brothers and sisters, and some of us worked in the business, some of us did not work in the business, or some worked in the business for periods of time and didn't for other periods of time. And if there's no conversation on a regular basis about what that means or doesn't mean, then that can lead to a lot of, I think, strife or misunderstanding within.
Probably a lot of assumptions.
A lot of assumptions, right? Yeah. And if you as the leader and the owner don't do a good job of facilitating that, then, or if you don't talk about it, then this is what happens. People just fill in the blanks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So whatever it is, the question that you didn't answer, and they didn't ask, then it's just fill in the blank. And typically that can go one of 2 ways. If they fill it in, they either fill it in with a very positive answer that may be, dashed later, to their chagrin, or they fill it in with a very negative answer. And that's very corrosive too, I think, within the family business. So once again, we've talked about it so many times in this podcast, but it really comes down to communication. heavy
over communication, especially with family members.
Yeah, it's almost, I get the sense that it's almost like 3 or 4 times the amount of communication than
Sure.
with the
not a
family
bad
dynamic.
metric. Yes.
You think about how often you check in with your employees and your managers, people that work for you. You're like, okay, I want to make sure this person is in position. They like what they're doing. They're not going to leave. So that you have your team together. And I think often as we don't do that with family members because we're like, oh, well, they're here. I don't really need to worry about that. And actually, you need to do it more because if you have family members that are in the business, there could be some that are in it because they're very aggressive and they're like, hey, this is an opportunity to really, do something more than I would somewhere else. You could have the flip side if you have someone's like, well, it's a good place to work, you don't have to work that hard, so you could have, you're going to have the spectrum of family members most likely. So you gotta over communicate, I think, like Wes says.
And I think once you've got your plan kind of written down and you've started to communicate that and maybe people are really in agreement, but then if you've talked about, okay, this is the length of time, this is kind of the metrics I need to meet in order to start transitioning the business, then you really need to get those things in place. If you're going to be doing some sort of a stock sale, or, you need to start getting things in place like buy-sell agreements and, maybe a stock purchase plan or any of those types of things that will actually allow that progression to start. What you wouldn't really want to have happen is, yes, here's my plan. This is what I'm thinking. And then, every year you review that and that plan, you just keep moving the goalposts out. And that's probably not an uncommon occurrence.
Totally common.
Especially if the owner is really enjoying it out there. This is great. This is fun. The business is doing well. I enjoy having my kids in the business, and why would I ever want to leave? So
why would I want to turn off this money tap?
Or why would I turn off the money tap? Yeah. There are lots of reasons. So that's another thing you got to be honest with yourself about.
I think the thing that as a leader, as we're talking about, okay, as building a family business, we're talking about estate plans, we're talking about trying to transition a business. And what's more important in the estate plan, is a lot of the transition ideas. I think as a leader, you have to be able to say, here are my goals, just like Wes said, and when we get to these goals, then I'm ready to step out and let somebody come in. And you can't keep moving the goalposts. Wes, I've been listening to the book Psychology of Money that you've read.
Oh, right.
So I'm just in that section about that most of us just keep moving the goalposts, like, oh yeah, I made $1 million. Well, now I want 2. I made 2. I want 4. And I'm sure that's very common for all business owners. It's like, oh, I never thought I'd do this well. Well, now I want to do even more. But if you said, hey, if I've got $5 million in cash and this much real estate, I'm done. Let the next person come on. You should stick with that.
That's an interesting one.
I think most people don't. Yeah, I think they just,
That's an interesting one, and I just finished up the book too. I'm glad I recommended that to you guys. No, just kidding, Wes. That was yours.
I mean, like 2 years ago, I said, you guys have got to read this. Even before it was published, I said, you guys should read this book when it comes out after it's written. And
you've always had that vision, Brooks. Yeah.
I'm visionary. Yeah.
But I think too with I don't know what the personality would be, but could be business leader or entrepreneur, just hard drivers, the tendency to move the goalpost. I could see part of it is like if you're just trying to see what your potential is, then sometimes you set the marker somewhere, and then if you get there, you're like, well, I wonder if I can do more. And I think that's just a really challenging one to put the goalpost out there and then commit to it. But I think what I'm hearing from you guys, like, you have to do that in these types of situations because there's other people involved, and maybe you say, okay, I'm going to put the goalpost there, but then if I want to keep pushing, I'm going to go start something different and just go, go over there, because that's a way to maybe marry both of those concepts together.
If one of your goals is to transition this business to your, to other family members, you have to get out of the way.
You got to draw the line in the sand somewhere, right?
Yeah, because if they're not a family member, how they're going to grow is they're going to go work at a different company, and you see that as just being, that's natural. I mean, I don't have a spot for Bob here anymore, and he needs to grow in his career. He's going to move on. Well, Bob's free to do that because he's not related to you. But if you have your kids working for you, or nephews or nieces, and they feel some sort of family responsibility, they don't have the freedom to exit like a non-family member, because they're like, oh well, I've got this family commitment, and there's all these other emotions that go into that. So I think that's where, as a leader, you have to help that next generation, train them and have them understand how that works, and get out of the way so they can continue their growth.
And I think a good permission to use an analogy.
Granted.
Oh, please do. I hope
yeah.
I hope this is going to be an analogous situation. Let's go.
Yeah, but now the pressure's on. It better be a good one.
Oh yeah, I don't know that it is. But, so I think it's analogous to playing a game, right? So business is the game, and you is the creator of the game. You've created this game of business, and if you've invited these other people into play. So you've invited your employees into play, you've invited your family members into play, everyone's playing the game. If the rules aren't clear, or worse yet, you change the rules in the game, eventually people will stop wanting to play the game. And then you will be stuck all by yourself without anyone here to play the game with you. And you'll just be stuck with the game pieces and the board, and that's it. So I think that's a good way to look at it is, hey, if you change the rules of the game in the midst of the game, most people have a high degree of fairness, what they perceive as being fair or not fair. And so they'll excuse themselves. Maybe not right away, but eventually. That's my analogy.
That was a pretty good analogy.
Yeah, okay, good.
I don't know. Maybe Brooks thought differently, but
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah,
really, because I didn't even know what analogy meant until he brought it up, and now I'm like, oh, that's a big word.
Oh, yeah, it's similar to this. I see. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a good analogy, because what I'm hearing from you guys is the goalpost and kind of like the agreement of what you've talked about as the transition plan. Like everyone's kind of going down that path. And then all of a sudden, if you just go, well, let's go a little further before, then at that point, that like snaps everyone into frustration, because they're like, wait, we were all under this agreement and now it changed. And so I guess, do you guys recommend like getting that documented as like, you have your estate plan, but then you're like documenting and signing like something else? Or how does that, especially if you're having to talk about it every year to update it? I don't know, this stuff, just the more we talk about it, the messier it feels.
I don't know that it's a signed document. Maybe Brooks would agree. I think it's just it's a living document. But I think that honesty piece of saying, because if you do change it, I mean, there may be a legitimate reason to change it. So I mean,
sure.
Made that analogy, but at that point, if you decide you're going to change the rules of the game, or how long the game's going to take, or any of those types of things, then you need to get all the players to buy in, or someone's going to flip the board and walk out. Yeah.
So it's more like a backyard game where you're playing, but then there's this cool little add-on, and everyone's like, "Yes, we'll do that."
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, because if you've ever played jarts, so those of you old enough all know the game of jarts, right? Which is lawn darts, which is probably the greatest game ever developed, which is fantastic. Essentially, got your lawn darts about this long, it's got a sharp pointing end, and you play it out on the grass and you put a circle down at one end and you try to throw the darts in. Incredibly dangerous. Now, I mean, they never get approved today.
Outlawed.
Fantastic game. But to that point of being dangerous, if you change the rules too many times, someone's going to throw a jart at you. So you got to be careful.
Oh man. So what are the, I guess, the takeaways for people with this? I mean, if we were to kind of summarize, I mean, like, I don't know, the last several episodes, as we've been talking, it just feels like no wonder this doesn't happen. You guys have mentioned it's a lot of work. You really got to want to transition the business, and that's got to be kind of your top priority above money and like personal growth and your other things, because if those things take a top seat, it feels like the rest of it has just a smaller and smaller chance of working out. So I guess, Brooks, if you were to kind of summarize a few takeaways for people with this discussion, what would you say?
Oh yeah, the takeaways would be as you're thinking about building a family business, and you have the potential of some family members to come into the business, is be clear about what your financial goals are, and then take those financial goals and plug them into your business model and see how those would work, and then be willing to commit to those financial goals, and then meet with your other potential family members who are going to come and say, hey, once I achieve these family goals, I'm going to be ready to transition this company over. And then you discuss what that transition plan would look like, and then get input from those family members and see if they're interested. You may find they're like, yeah, I'm fine working here, but I'm really not interested. And I probably was only going to be here another year. You'll get all sorts of different responses you'll be very surprised at. But figure out what your financial goals are, and be willing to meet and share those with your family members and say, hey, when we get to these goals, I'm ready to make the transition. And people can then see, oh man, that's a 20-year runway, or it's a 2-year runway. So I would say those are kind of the two most critical things. I don't know, Wes, what do you think?
Yeah, I just double down on the communication piece, and thorough, complete, and honest communication on a regular basis. And don't leave any of the family out of the communication discussion. So make sure if there's siblings both in and out of the business, or could be, everyone understands, once again, what the rules are, even if they're not playing in that particular game.
Good advice. Yeah. Yeah. And for everybody listening too, if you guys are working through some of these types of scenarios, feel free to shoot us a message, leave a comment on one of the show notes, or send us an email at hello@builderfunnel.com or radio@builderfunnel.com. And we love to hear about those. And if you guys have specific questions, we'll bring those onto the show, and we can kind of talk through them, because I don't know, it feels like every situation is very unique, very different. But there's still some good strategy pieces to move through those. But it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen usually to multiple generations. And it's just, so I think just sharing different stories and communicating about this stuff will help people go down that path if they so choose. So take us up on that, shoot us a quick note. And as always, we appreciate you guys listening. We'll see you next week here on Building a Family Business on Builder Funnel Radio.